All right, welcome back. We are finishing out Matthew chapter 27 as we work our way through the three most important days of all of human history: the death, the burial, the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. And your destiny and my destiny and everyone else's destiny is wrapped up in this story. Isn't it a great tragedy that although many of us have been blessed to hear this story many, many, many times over the years, and how blessed we are, still there are people around the world by the millions and hundreds of millions and even billions who have never heard it one time. And so our ears are blessed, and we need to do what we can so that everyone else hears this amazing message. All right, Matthew chapter 27, and starting in verse number 62. This is new for us. Now, on the next day, the day after the preparation, well, and then this is the Sabbath day. This is Saturday, which starts at sundown on Friday evening and ends at sundown on Saturday evening. The chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, quote, "Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, quote, 'After 3 days I am to rise again,' end quote." Now, I've questioned, how did they hear that? Because that was not something that Jesus really made public. We know that, according to the gospel records, that he did tell his disciples that on several occasions, although apparently it didn't sink in, and even the angel has to remind the women at the tomb on the resurrection morning of what Jesus said. Hey, don't you remember? Here's what he said. He would rise on the third day. But somehow, these chief priests and Pharisees know it. Now, it could have trickled down from Jesus' disciples on to a few others and made it to them, although, I just wonder about that. Jesus did one time publicly say, "Destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll rebuild it." In fact, that was brought up at his trial before the Sanhedrin. But again, nobody seemed to catch the idea that he was talking about his own body. Okay? So where'd they get that? I don't know. Nobody knows for sure, but I have to wonder whether or not that wasn't something that Judas told them as well, that if you're going to do away with Jesus, you need to make sure that there's no deception afterwards by his disciples. Man, Judas was certainly the quintessential wolf in sheep's clothing, wasn't he? Okay, so again, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there for your consideration. But they feel they need to take some kind of action in order to prevent this potential deception that they see on the horizon. And so in verse number 64 of Matthew 27, "Therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, quote, 'He has risen from the dead,' end quote, and the last deception will be worse than the first." Well, these guys are the ones who are the deceivers, and they're self-deceived into thinking that Jesus was nobody but a deceiver. I mean, it's just layer upon layer of pathetic information here talking about them. Now, although I feel bad that they were so deceived, in one sense, I have kind of a perverse sense of gladness in that they took this precaution, because had they not taken this precaution, then no doubt there would have been people who accused the disciples of stealing his body away and saying that, he was risen from the dead. So I'm glad for their skepticism. I'm glad they're trying to keep Jesus in that grave. But when you're trying to keep God down, you're up against, forces that are pretty big, all right? Trying to keep God behind a stone when God says, "I'm going to get out of there," you're wasting your time. I'm also kind of in a funny sense, I'm glad that Thomas, remember doubting Thomas, who we'll eventually read about? I'm kind of glad he doubted. He says, "I won't believe until I put my hand in his side and see the nail prints in his hands." Well, you have no doubt then that when Thomas ultimately was convinced, this skeptic was convinced, that makes the whole story more believable for us. It wasn't just a bunch of, charismatic Christians who just believe anything that anybody tells them, and so now this wild story has been concocted. No, we have some people that, are attempting to use a little bit of reasonable skepticism here. I mean, how many times do you hear of someone being raised from the dead? And just because somebody gives you the report, even if it's a good friend, why would you believe that? The reason Jesus was, reprimanded Thomas for his doubt is because Jesus himself told all of them, "I'm going to rise again on the third day." Okay, So Thomas didn't believe the word of Jesus, and that was his fault. And so anyways, continuing on the story in Matthew 27, verse number 65, Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you know how." So he gave them some authority. And the guard, Roman soldiers. And they went and made the grave secure, and along with the guard, they set a seal on the stone. I don't know what that was all about, setting a seal on the stone, but they did it anyways. And so there you have it. There's the grave secure. There's the grave guarded. Now, we come to the end of Matthew chapter 27 and on into Matthew chapter 28, the final chapter of Matthew's gospel. And I only wish that there were 20 more chapters, because there are so many things that occurred and transpired after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It just doesn't seem Matthew, Mark, Luke, or even John have given it the time and the detail I wish they would have. They're all truncated to some degree, and you have to really put them all together in order to make some sense out of it, because they could even seem, the reports of what happened right after Christ was resurrected, they could seem contradictory. Years ago when I was a pastor, I spent, I think, about 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 years just harmonizing every Easter the components of the Easter story. And I eventually ran out of stuff to say. That's one of the trials of being a pastor, coming up with new Easter sermons every year that nobody's heard before. But I put all the stories together and tried to piece them, so that they all harmonized. And if you just read Matthew's gospel, for example, what we're about to read here now, you'd think that Mary came to the tomb and stayed there one time and then saw the angels and then saw Jesus. But you read other gospels and you realize she came, she left, she came back again. And she may have left and come back again. I don't know, okay? But it's going to be very, very exciting now as we look upon this most important part of Matthew's gospel, the story of Jesus' resurrection. So I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.